Well, thank you. This is my talk, what I call 10A, because I've split up talk 10 into two parts. This is my 60-second summary. And this refers to what happens after the Roman Empire finishes, and we come to, as it were, the time of the modern world, around about 1600, 1700. The first thing to say is the Roman Empire only finishes around 470 AD in the West. The Eastern Roman Empire does continue under about 1458, when Constantinople falls to the Ottomans. Beyond that, there was in fact a growth in Christianity in two directions. Firstly, the Persian church spread Christianity into India, into Central Asia, and into China. It sadly peaked around about the 10th and 11th centuries and was effectively destroyed under Talmud in the 15th century. In the Africa, we have the growth of the African church in Ethiopia, and this church thrives throughout the whole of this 2,000-year period and is still here today. In terms of Europe, obviously there was the barbarian invasions that took place that destroyed the Western Church and the Western Empire. However, this whole process was reversed by the, might say, the re-evangelization of Europe. In Britain, it has a rather nice story. We have Patrick going to Ireland. From Ireland, Columba goes to Scotland, and from Scotland, Aidan comes to Northumberland and sets up Christianity in the north. And in the south, Augustine comes from the Roman Church and Gregory the Great. And so eventually by 600 AD, much of the United Kingdom has become Christian. Now, putting to one side the Christian side of that history, one could then look at the rest of this period, the next 1,000 years, from the British perspective, has been the development of government and democracy in particular. And I think the great leader there was Alfred the Great, who resisted the Viking invasions and set up what we might call modern England, with its shires and its sense of central government and king's authority. And the Normans kept that going, particularly under Henry I and Henry II, who maintained a very strong legal basis for our government. And then with the Magna Carta under John, there was the important concept that the king was under the law and not above the law. And that really becomes the germinating factor in our democracy, which the development of Parliament later on in that century, with Edward I using parliaments extensively to raise taxes, actually, for his wars. And Parliament was used by Thomas Cromwell with Henry's connivance to establish the church in this country and separate it from Rome and to dissolve the monasteries. It was much easier to have Parliament do that than the king to do it. And of course, with this use of Parliament so much by kings, when the 17th century, the Stuart monarchs of James I and Charles I wanted to restore an absolute monarchy, it wasn't possible because there was already an appetite for parliamentary democracy. And therefore, there was a civil war in 1642 to 1645, which the king lost, and ultimately Charles I was executed. We did restore his son to the throne in 1660, but was on the understanding that he was to submit to Parliament. And when in 1688 his brother, James II, tried to restore Catholicism to this country, he was told to leave, basically, and we got a Dutch king, William III, to take on the role of being king. And this is when you have, in a sense, what's called the Glorious Revolution of 1689, which establishes once and for all that Parliament is sovereign and not the king. And that's, in a sense, been the constitutional blueprint of Britain since then. And the concept of this parliamentary democracy has been exported around the world. And so it's been a significant part of history. Well, thank you for listening.